17 of the fantasy football season, and it's championship weekend for most leagues. So here's a few running backs I look to get on the wire this week. And time of filming this video, no one has been placed on the protocol list. The first guy, Rex Burkhead of the Houston Texans. So Burkhead, he's come out of nowhere the last few games here for a Texan team. That's obviously one of the worst teams in the league, even though they're coming off a monster victory and a surprising victory versus the Chargers, 41-29 in Week 16. So Burkhead and David Johnson, pretty much the two only backs over there for the most part in Houston. So the last few games here for Burkhead, Week 14 versus Seattle, 11 carries, 40 yards, 4 catches, 26 yards. Week 15 at Jacksonville, 16 carries, 41 yards, a catch for 6 yards. And then Week 16 versus the Chargers, a huge ball game, 22 carries, 149 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 catches. So right here, Burkhead looks like he's going to be the lead guy for the last 2 weeks of the season here. And this is a guy we've seen in the past with the New England Patriots have some big games throughout his career. In Week 17, he's got a mediocre matchup at San Francisco that gives up the 15th most fantasy points to running backs on the season. So right here with a lot of guys on and off the COVID list, some running backs banged up as well this week as well going into Week 17. I think Burkhead could be a decent number 2 running back or flex option, and right now he's available in 86% of fantasy leagues. The next running back at this week's Derrick Gore of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So James Robinson, he's going to be out for the season, torn Achilles, and he was ruled out and hurt quickly in that Week 16 ball game at the New York Jets. So Agubawale, he had a decent ball game filling in for Robinson. Carlos Hyde, we don't know his status for sure if he'll suit up in Week 17, but Agubawale turned some heads and had a good game. So the last couple games for him, not much of a workload when Robinson was in there. Week 14 at Tennessee, 2 catches, 5 yards. Week 16 versus Houston, a catch, 5 yards, 1 rush attempt for a yard. And then Week 16 with pretty much a full workload at the Jets, 17 carries, 57 yards, a touchdown, 2 catches, 15 yards. So Week 17 in New England, very tough matchup, no doubt about it here for any running back pretty much this season in the NFL. So right here in a championship situation, it's going to be tough to trust him, but he's still a guy I would go out there and get on the waiver wire here is Agubawale because he had a good game versus the Jets. It looks like he's going to be a starting running back in Week 17 unless Hyde comes back and they play him. And right now he's available in 99% of fantasy leagues. Next running back's Keyshawn Vaughn of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Vaughn had a big 55-yard run early in that ball game versus the Carolina Panthers, and he looked good for the first time, getting a major workload, obviously, with Leonard Fournette out a few more weeks. 7 carries, 70 yards, and a touchdown in that ball game. Obviously, Ronald Jones got the majority of the touches, but right here, if Jones goes down or could go on the COVID list, I think Keyshawn Vaughn's a decent ad, and he showed good breakaway speed here for this Tampa Bay Buc team on that touchdown run. So right now, he's available in 99% of fantasy leagues. And if you got a dead spot on your roster or a guy's going to be out with COVID or an injury, I think Keyshawn Vaughn's a decent ad this week here. And we showed that he had some explosiveness in that ball game. The next running back's Derrick Gore of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Gore here, I've been liking the things I've seen from him this season, where he got a decent amount of work. So the few games he got work this year, Week 8 versus the Giants, 11 carries, 48 yards, a touchdown. Week 14 versus the Vegas Raiders, 9 carries, 66 yards, a touchdown, 2 catches, 23 yards. And then Week 16 versus Pittsburgh, 12 carries, 43 yards, and 3 catches in that ball game for 61 yards. So Gore, I think he's more of an all-around running back than any of these backs over here in Kansas City. He's a physical running back. He's going to give you a beating at the line. And now with Clyde Edwards-Helaire banged up once again with the collarbone or shoulder injury, whatever it is, it didn't look good. He was busted up going back to the locker room, was Edwards-Helaire. And I doubt he's going to play in this Week 17 ball game. So right now, Williams and Gore, it looks like they're going to split in this ball game coming up in Week 17 at Cincinnati. And Williams, he's already owned in about 65% of fantasy leagues. But Gore right now, he's available in 98% of fantasy leagues, and it's a good matchup at Cincinnati in Week 17. That gives up the 12th most fantasy points to running backs on the season. So right now, if you want to get Gore on your roster, I think he could have a decent role. And I don't think Edwards-Helaire is going to play in next week's ball game with the injury and also with the Chiefs having a good season this year at 11-4. They don't have to rush him back from the collarbone or shoulder, but there was no structural damage. He should return, but I think they're going to hold him back and ease back his workload until the playoffs here is Kansas City. So I think Gore's a decent add this week. And the fifth and final running back I look to get on the wire this week's Boston Scott of the Philadelphia Eagles. So right here, Miles Sanders broke his hand in Week 16 versus the New York Giants. And it looks like Boston Scott's going to have another good workload once again, like we saw him a few weeks ago before Sanders returned to the lineup, even though I think Jordan Howard's going to be the favorite over there for the early down back. But Boston Scott could carry the workload as well. So the last few games here for Scott, Week 11 versus New Orleans, 6 carries, 16 yards, 2 catches, 2 yards. Week 12 at the Giants, 15 carries, 64 yards, a touchdown, 2 catches, 8 yards, a fumble loss. And then Week 16 versus the Giants, 12 carries, 41 yards, and a touchdown. So right here, Week 17, a pretty good matchup at the Washington football team here for Boston Scott and this Philadelphia Eagle team. And as long as Scott's going to get 12 to 15 touches in this game, I think he's a decent number 2, a flex option, especially with Miles Sanders out. So right now, Scott's available in 85% of fantasy leagues, and he's a running back I would get on the wire this week. So that's a few running backs I look to add on the waiver wire for Week 17 of the fantasy football season.